Welcome, everybody. You are at the William T. Grant Foundation's webinar on applying for research funding, research interests, and opportunities. I'm Adam Gameron. I'm the president of the foundation, having started in this job on the 1st of September of last year. And I'm joined today by Vivian Tsang, our vice president for program, and Kim Dumont, our program officer. You will see a box to enter questions, and we see those questions scrolling along. For example, someone has already written to us about whether this initiative is part of my Brother's Keeper initiative. The answer is no. We'll be referring to those questions periodically throughout the course of the presentation. Only we, the presenters, can view the questions, and we will not have time to answer every question that scrolls along. We will answer the ones that are most common, that seem most salient, but we are keeping a record of all these questions, and we will use them to construct a frequently answered question, an FAQ document, that we will make available to everyone. In addition, and you'll find the details on our website, if you have colleagues or students who aren't able to join us today, they'd like to have another chance, we do have that opportunity coming up on March 14th. Now, what will we be talking about today? The webinar will have 3 sections. First, very briefly, I'll give a snapshot of the William T. Grant Foundation. Second, we'll talk about our research interests. And third, we'll go over the logistics of applying for research grants. Many of you have joined in today because you've heard about our new research interest in reducing inequality, and that will certainly be part of the presentation in the second section. The William T. Grant Foundation is a private grant-making foundation. It's a modest-sized foundation. Our annual budget for making grants is $10 to $12 million, and the vast majority of our external funding goes to support research. We are mid-sized. We have about 20 employees, and that is what supports all of the operations, the grant-making, the decision-making, the monitoring, and all of the associated administrative responsibilities. We support research in 2 areas. First of all, our focus is on youth ages 5 to 25. Now, our longtime followers will know that this is an expansion of our age range. Formerly, we covered age 8 to 25, and we've pushed that back a bit so that we cover the full period of formal schooling. And within this broader theme of research on youth, we're focusing on research that helps us understand ways to reduce inequality in youth outcomes, and on the use of research evidence in policy and practice. So let me turn first to the initiative on reducing inequality. Since the 1980s, income inequality has grown in the United States. And not only that, recent evidence shows that the effects of inequality on child and youth outcomes is growing. So not only do we have increasing inequality, but the degree to which that inequality affects young people's futures is exacerbated. Now, if you combine increasing inequality and decreasing, or at best, frozen mobility chances, you see that this situation presents a critical challenge for researchers and policymakers alike. We're interested in inequality along lines of income, but also disparities by race and ethnicity, immigration status, and language minority status are especially salient. So in response, we are seeking proposals, research proposals, on programs, policies, and practices that reduce inequality in youth outcomes. By programs, we mean coordinated sets of activities that are designed to achieve specific aims. Policies are intended to promote success through the allocation of resources or the regulation of activities. And by practices, we refer to materials and activities through which youth development is enabled. Among the outcomes of particular interests, we include academic, social, behavioral, and economic outcomes. However, other outcomes can also be proposed based on a compelling case for their importance in the development of young people. Of course, we have special concern for our most vulnerable children and families, for those subjected to poverty, for those in dire circumstances. But we are interested in inequality across the full spectrum of the population. For example, today middle-class families are struggling to send their young people to college due to the increases in tuition costs. So that would also be an aspect of inequality that we would like to understand and find ways to reduce. Now, you could reduce inequality by helping those lower down or by pulling down those who are higher up. Obviously, we only want to focus on one aspect of this. We seek to reduce inequality by raising those at the bottom, not by pulling down those at the top. Now, you can imagine that if you've identified an effective program, practice, or policy, that there might be two ways of reducing inequality. One would be to identify programs that can be applied to everyone but are especially effective for those who are initially disadvantaged. So if that program is applied universally, it will have a gap-closing impact. But many programs are equally effective for all recipients. These too can be gap-closing if they are disproportionately allocated to the disadvantaged. So either of these strategies is of interest to us. Whatever the focus, we ask that proposals should be clear on, first, the domain of inequality. What aspect of inequality are you focused on? For example, low-income students falling behind in school. Second, what's the leverage point for reducing inequality? For example, a program that improves school climate keeps students engaged. And be clear also on the indication of success. How do we know that this program, policy, or practice helps reduce inequality? For example, does it result in improved student, classroom quality and student outcomes? So every proposal should be clear on these elements. Our goal in the Reducing Inequality initiative is to build strong theory and compelling evidence about ways to reduce inequality. Here at the Foundation, we are developing resources which will help applicants prepare their proposals and think about ways to reduce inequality. Think about a research project that will identify ways to reduce inequality. We'll have an annual report essay coming out in June of this year, which will elaborate on the themes I've introduced in the webinar so far. We have also commissioned several papers, which we hope will be agenda setting for researchers interested in these topics. So far, we have papers coming on social inequality, on immigration and education, and on juvenile justice. And these and others will be released during the period of June to December 2014. Well, let me pause there and take questions specifically related to the Inequality Initiative. I'll take a couple of questions now, and then we'll have more time to get back to the questions when all the presentation sections are over.
Someone made the point that inequality has been an area of interest for a lot of funders. And they're wondering what will be innovative or different about the William T. Grant Foundation approach to studying this.
I love that question. There are 5 elements of our approach that are distinctive, and when taken together, make our approach unique. There are probably 1,000 foundations that are concerned with inequality. So why? So what's special about our approach? Well, first of all, we're focusing on research. That probably cuts out 975 of the 1,000 foundations. Second is our focus on youth. Third is our emphasis on action. That is, we want research that will ultimately, in the long term, lead us to steps we can take to reduce inequality or make better use of evidence, as you'll hear in the next section. So we recognize that no single study is going to change the way things work or reduce inequality on its own. But we hope that an accumulation of studies will contribute to action. Fourth is the Foundation's contributions to tools, something we've experienced over our long history on many occasions, including most recently in our social settings initiative, which the Inequality Initiative builds on, and many of those tools, such as statistical approaches and statistical tools for engaging in randomized trials, will be useful in this setting, and new tools that we envision emerging to support the research on inequality across many different researchers. And a fifth distinctive feature is our emphasis on interdisciplinarity. Many of the proposals that we fund have interdisciplinary features themselves, and certainly if you look across our portfolio, it is interdisciplinary in nature.
Someone made the point that inequality has been an area of interest for a lot of funders, and they're wondering what will be innovative or different about the William T. Grant Foundation approach to studying this.
I love that question. There are 5 elements of our approach that are distinctive, and when taken together, make our approach unique. There are probably 1,000 foundations that are concerned with inequality. So what's special about our approach? Well, first of all, we're focusing on research. That probably cuts out 975 of the 1,000 foundations. Second is our focus on youth. Third is our emphasis on action. That is, we want research that will ultimately, in the long term, lead us to steps we can take to reduce inequality or make better use of evidence, as you'll hear in the next section. So we recognize that no single study is going to change the way things work or reduce inequality on its own. But we hope that an accumulation of studies will contribute to action. Fourth is the Foundation's contributions to tools, something we've experienced over our long history on many occasions, including most recently in our social settings initiative, which the Inequality Initiative builds on, and many of those tools, such as statistical approaches and statistical tools for engaging in randomized trials, will be useful in this setting, and new tools that we envision emerging to support the research on inequality across many different researchers. And a fifth distinctive feature is our emphasis on interdisciplinarity. Many of the proposals that we fund have interdisciplinary features themselves, and certainly if you look across our portfolio, it is interdisciplinary in nature.
So, Adam, we have one question, which is whether our interests are limited to just education, and if it is just education, whether it's limited to just public schools or if you consider research interests in other kinds of schools.
Yes, thank you. This is an excellent question. Given my own background, people might be concerned that the Foundation is narrowing its interests only to education, but that is not the case. We are interested in inequality in all domains of youth development. Much of our work has funded studies in child welfare, in juvenile justice, in mental health. So it is not only academic outcomes and not only education settings that are of interest to the Foundation. So please, other areas are warmly invited.
Okay. And on a related note, people are asking if you're interested in health disparities, or health as an outcome.
So health as an outcome, we have not included in our focal areas, but we are willing to consider applications that propose health outcomes based on a compelling case for their importance, and perhaps in conjunction with other types of outcomes that are on our main list of academic, social, behavioral, and economic outcomes.
So, Adam, we have a series of questions from people who are familiar with the Foundation's prior interests in social settings. And the question is, how do we now think about those interests in relation to the new inequality interests?
That's a great question. Thanks for bringing it up. We view the Inequality Initiative as building on our past work on social settings. Social settings can be an important vehicle for addressing problems of inequality, whether it's schools, families, neighborhoods, community centers, after-school programs, summer camps. All of these are contexts in which the challenges of inequality can be addressed. So we would expect to see proposals that include social settings as among the mechanisms for addressing inequality. Moreover, the tools that were developed with the support of the Foundation, the optimal design software, the framework for understanding variation in treatment effect, and other tools should be useful to researchers in this under this new initiative. But addressing social settings is not a requirement of the new initiative on inequality.
So another question that we're having is whether you're interested in just the outcomes of inequality or whether you're also interested in the sources of inequality.
Thank you so much for asking that question. Our primary focus is on driving towards responses to the problem of inequality. We recognize that no single study is likely to have the answer to the problem, but we hope that studies will accumulate over time to a body of knowledge that helps us address the problem. So on the whole, we are more interested in responses to inequality than a documentation of the existence of inequality.
Okay, so one question that was related is whether the research has to be directly tied to current programs practices or whether it can be theory building to inform future practices and programs.
Thank you for that question. I'm glad we made time for it. We are interested in work that helps build theories to develop programs that might be implemented in the future. So we are not focusing only on testing existing programs, but also developing new knowledge that will help build programs or policies that can ultimately reduce inequality in youth outcomes.
Great.
Now I'd like to turn it over to Vivian Tseng for the discussion of research interest in policy, research use in policy practice.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So as you can already tell from Adam's comments, one of the foundation's interests, which remains unchanged, is to produce and to support research that can inform policies, programs, and practices with the ultimate aim of supporting youth development. For a while now, the Foundation has had a specific initiative supporting studies examining the use of research in policy and practice. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about this ongoing interest of ours. And our position on this is that even as the research base is growing and it's been becoming stronger, we don't feel very satisfied that research is having the impact that it could. We and other funders have done a lot to strengthen the rigor of research, so to improve the supply of it. But we know that we still know very little about when and how research is used or what types of research are more likely to be used. And so we're interested in increasing understanding of when, how, and under what conditions research is used. So for example, how do policymakers, administrators, and service providers use research? Under what conditions are they more likely to use research? Are there certain stages of the policy process when research is more likely to have influence? And ultimately, our goal is to strengthen the use of research. And part of that, we're also interested in learning how to strengthen the usefulness of research as a way of seeing that it's more often used productively. And an overarching theme in all of this, all of our funding really, is to build strong theory and empirical evidence on these questions. This is the way we think we're accumulating a better body of knowledge on these questions. So let me step back a little bit and think about what it means to use research, because I think there are often some common perceptions about it. So for example, a lot of our predominant and popular thinking focuses on the instrumental functions of research. And the very basic idea is that research directly influences a particular decision. And this resonates with a rational linear model of decision making, where research has a direct impact on a particular decision. But even if we think about this more carefully, we see that there are lots of other influences on decisions. And decisions here can be, a legislator making a decision about whether to support a piece of legislation, an administrator and a child welfare agency deciding whether to adopt an evidence-based program. There are any number of ways we can think about this playing out. But the more complicated aspect is that when research comes into a decision-making context, it's also coming into a context where people are looking at local data to better understand the populations that they're serving. They're bringing their professional judgment and their experience to the decision-making context. People are also thinking about the political ramifications of any decision that they're making and the values that exist, whether it's their own values or the values of those in their community. And of course, people are also thinking about the different constituencies, staff, whether they're caseworkers or teachers, parents and families that are being served. So in this more complicated space, it's hard to identify research as something that determines a decision. More often, research enters into this more complicated decision-making space. And so we're interested in understanding if this is the reality of the situation, how do we understand the role that research is playing amongst all these other factors? And of course, research doesn't just have instrumental roles. It can also play some conceptual roles. So for example, it can influence the ways in which people understand problems and understand potential solutions to those problems. Carol Weiss did a lot of the classic work in this area in the 1970s and 80s. And she described this as research's enlightenment function. So it enlightens the way people think about problems and orient themselves to the solution. She also described it as a way in which research seeps into a policy context. It's a slow, gradual process. It seeps in, and then there's a gradual sedimentation as it shapes the way people think about issues. Now, research also can play a political function. We live in a political context. Policymaking is inherently political. And so research is sometimes used as part of a political strategy. And here we're thinking about research when it's used to bolster positions that people have already decided. So maybe a legislator already knows that they support a particular reform effort or they're against a particular piece of legislation, and research is just brought to bear in supporting that point. And here research is used more to persuade others to join the side. So as we think about the types of studies we're interested in projects that enrich our explanations of when, how, and to what effect research is used. We're also interested in research that examines attempts to improve the use of research. You know, there are a lot of initiatives out there in different ways that people are trying to work on this problem. And our goal is to systematically learn from those attempts. So as an example, a lot of people are interested in research practice partnerships, whether they're between child welfare agencies and university researchers, or these consortiums between university researchers and school district central offices. There are a lot of different configurations of these. And our interest is learning from them. Do they indeed improve the use of research? And if they do, what are the mechanisms by which they do that? And then lastly, we're interested in projects that improve our methods and our measures for studying the use of research. Early work on knowledge utilization, especially in the 70s and 80s, relied pretty heavily on self-report methods, on interviews and surveys of individual decision makers, and they would be asked about their attitudes or their perceptions of research, whether they thought research was more or less useful, whether they were likely or less likely to use different types of research. And of course, there's some strong limitations to it, over-reliance on these self-report methods. For one, they're not analyzing or assessing research use in actual situations and contexts in which people are making particular decisions and encountering research. And there's also a lot of demand characteristics at play, so that people want, especially in these contexts where there's more and more attention to evidence-based policy and practice, there could be a greater press for folks to say that they are looking at research and taking it seriously. So we're interested in work that improves methods and measures for both assessing research use and assessing the various ways in which it might get diffused and used. For those of you who are interested in applying under this area, I would encourage you to look at this document, which is located on our website. It provides supplementary guidance for applicants. So in addition to our research grant application guide, this is a special document that goes into more detail about what we're looking for in applications under this research interest, and it gives some suggestions for developing proposals. So let me pause there and take some questions.
Vivian, one question is whether you would consider implementation research a part of examining attempts to improve the use of research.
Yes. So the answer is yes, if it increases our understanding of the use of research evidence. So you can imagine some questions when you're trying to understand the decision, say, a child welfare agency leader or more likely a mid-level manager is making. There's a whole series of implementation a decision maker can make in deciding how to implement a program, which could be drawn from research or not. So if there are a series of questions about implementation, but trying to understand the ways in which research comes into play in those decisions, then it could be a good fit.
We also have a question about whether there's a preference or balance between quantitative and qualitative methods used to approach these studies.
Yeah, that's a great question. So for all of our funding, we don't lead with the research design or methods. What we always do is we start by looking at the research questions. Are they compelling research questions? Do they fit the state of knowledge in the field? And then we look at the research design and methods to figure out if they would provide strong evidence on those questions. And so my answer to that is there's no a priori preference for either quantitative or qualitative work. We encourage people to think about the state of the field, to consider their particular research questions and what's the best way to answer them.
But just one more question for Vivian at this point. One questioner has asked, what is the amount of funds available in the Use of Research Evidence Initiative?
So it's under our major research grant program, and those funds range between $100,000 and $600,000. That's the same for our research grants on inequality as well. The average grant is about $300,000.
Questions about the Inequality Initiative that we didn't get to earlier, and we will be turning to them at the conclusion before the webinar. Okay, turning it over to Kim.
Now that Adam and Vivian have presented about our interests, I'm going to walk you through the application process and describe some of the qualities we value in proposals. The process starts with a 5-page letter of inquiry. We think of this as a mini proposal that defines the study's key research questions and hypotheses, describes the relevant literature and motivating theory, and offers a concise overview of the sampling strategy, methods, measures, and analysis plan. These letters are accepted 3 times a year, and our next deadline is May 6th. All submissions are done electronically and are reviewed internally for fit and quality. This process usually takes about 6 to 8 weeks. And just as a piece of information, we've been reviewing between 150 and 180 letters per cycle. About 15% of these letters are invited to submit a full proposal. About a quarter to 1/3 of those proposals move to the board. So ultimately, from the letter of inquiry stage to funding, about 5% of the letters are funded. Applicants sometimes ask for help while they're developing their LOI, but we're a small staff and generally not able to conduct phone calls, face-to-face meetings, or reviews of proposals prior to submission. Rather, we recommend that you engage with the materials posted on the Foundation's website and then submit your letter at one of the deadlines. In addition, applicants often want to know why their proposal wasn't invited. And while we do notify everyone of our decision, we don't have the capacity to provide individualized feedback at the LOI stage. The next stage in the process is the review of the full proposal. And the full proposals are essentially a more developed version of the letter of inquiry. These are accepted 3 times a year and are by invitation only. The entire review process, from the letter of inquiry to board approval, takes on average about 10 to 15 months. The full proposal review process occupies about 6 months of that time frame. The actual review process is very rigorous. Once we receive the proposal, it's sent out to 2 or 3 external reviewers. We typically recruit reviewers for their content and methodological expertise. For proposals involving the study of the use of research evidence, we also involve a reviewer from policy or practice. Once the external review is complete, a select group of proposals moves on to 2 members of our senior program team who review the proposal internally. Following this review, a few investigators are offered the opportunity to provide a written response to the concerns raised by the various reviewers. Once complete, the senior program team reviews this response and makes an initial recommendation for funding. These recommendations are then presented to the board. Where applicants often ask us what makes a proposal competitive, and we find the most successful proposals have the following qualities. They demonstrate the project's relevance for our interests. The project adds value to theory and directly or indirectly informs either policy or practice. The research questions show strong links to theory and prior empirical work. The design, methods, and analyses are appropriate given what is already known in the field, and the proposed work is described with enough detail for reviewers to conduct a rigorous review. And finally, the proposal is thoughtfully constructed and easily understood. There are also strong links between the research questions and all other sections of the proposal, and these projects are typically beyond the planning and pilot stages of work. To learn more about our interest and the application process, please visit our website and review the application guide. There's a lot of thoughts and questions and answers in there for you. And I'm going to open it now to questions for any one of us to go through.
Kim, we have a number of questions that relate to the kinds of proposals that we're interested in. One question is about the length. Some people do longitudinal research. They want to be able to follow subjects for a number of years. Is that something we can address?
Sure. So people have proposed longitudinal proposals to us, and they come in various sizes from 2 to 5 years typically. But we generally fund studies that are about 3 years in length, although exceptions can be made.
Okay. Another question I would like to know our stance regarding program evaluation versus pure research. Could you speak to that question?
Yes. The same requirements that we use or criteria for judging a proposal apply, that a program evaluation would have to not just be interested in a particular program, but also contribute to theory more broadly.
Thank you. Does the foundation place any restrictions on publications of research funded by the foundation?
I'm not sure I quite understand that. No, would be my answer.
Okay, great. And are Canadians allowed to apply?
Sure. Anyone can apply, but our focus has to be on youth in the United States.
Yes, so we would be happy to accept a proposal from anyone around the world, but the focus of the research is on youth development of young people in the United States. Got it. Vivian, a question has come up back from your section of the presentation. It's about whether you're asking for research on the process of research and evaluating best practices or innovative practices about the process of research.
No. So the focus here is not about studying how research is produced. The focus here is on understanding how research is used. And so the key word here is used. And here our focus is used in policy and practice. So then a focal point for these studies is identifying who are the would-be users. Who does it make sense to think about users of research? Are they agency leaders and managers, whether they're in education, child welfare, juvenile justice? Is it legislators? Is it people within agencies who design professional development and staff training? Courts could be users of research.
Thank you. Kim, the more logistical questions have come up. Do we have a cap on the indirect cost rate?
Yes, it's 15%.
And about how many grants are typically awarded in a cycle?
Any typical cycle would be usually between 2 and 5 or 6.
Thank you. And so it seems like it's quite variable.
Yes, it is.
And it must depend on the quality of work that comes in at any given time.
Yeah. And the size of the award.
Another questioner is asking about your previous comment that the average size of a grant is $300,000. Over what time span is that typically?
Typical proposals are usually 2 to 3 years in length. So that's correct.
Thank you. Tell us about the pool of external reviewers that you get to evaluate the full proposals.
Sure. So we don't start with a pre-specified pool of reviewers, but rather generate and invite reviewers based on the proposals that we receive. And we try to match the content or substantive area with a reviewer in that area. And then if there's a particular novel methodology or one that we want to go recruit somebody for that expertise as well. And then for the proposals that are looking at use of research evidence, we also recruit a reviewer in the policy or practice area so they can comment both on the utility of the research being proposed and also on its feasibility as well.
Thank you. Vivian, a couple more questions have come up for you. One is about whether community development programs who use the research would be considered to use community development programs that use research to serve youth. Would that be considered use of research evidence?
Yes, I think it would. It's up to the applicant to make a strong case that it is there's a compelling rationale for focusing on that particular group of users, and that there is research available to be used. So in other words, it has to be a there to these studies.
Kim, there are two questions about who can apply.
Okay.
One is, can the same institution submit multiple proposals? And the other is, can the same individual submit multiple proposals?
And the answer to both is yes. What we want to be sure, there are no restrictions on the institution for the research grant. Multiple people from the same institution can submit. And an investigator, of course, could submit multiple grants. They would compete against each other, and we'd also want to make sure that they had time to do both if they were both being considered for funding.
Suppose I've submitted an LOI and it's been turned down. May I, and you haven't given me a lot of feedback about it, may I revise the LOI and submit it again in a different cycle?
Yes. Everyone's welcome to submit a letter of inquiry as many times as they want. If we give some customized feedback there, it might help in that way, but we generally don't do that. So, but you're certainly welcome to resubmit an LOI.
We have a number of questions about whether there are regional priorities or population subgroup priorities within the foundation. For example, one question that's come in is, do we have a preference for national over local research projects? Other questions have said, are we interested in particular parts of the country? How would you answer these questions?
So I would say that, again, we just apply the same criteria regardless of the population, although we're especially interested in vulnerable youth that in this case might be related to the inequality and disadvantage. And we also are interested in proposals that go beyond a particular locale to answer more broad questions about theory as well. So it doesn't restrict a particular geographic area or a preference for.
I was able to capture some notes on a whole series of questions that came in on the inequality agenda. I'd like to address one of them at length and then several others very briefly. The one I'd like to address at length was about whether the focus of our initiative is on reducing social inequality versus reducing the effects of inequality on children. And it's really the latter that is the focus. So let's take food stamps. So food stamps reduce inequality by helping poor people not go hungry. That's not the focus of our work. But whether food stamps helps children so they succeed better in school or have better socio-emotional health, that is the focus of our study. So that's where we come in. It's really on understanding how inequality is translated into the next generation and what outcomes that produces. That is the focus of our efforts. So when we say programs, policies, and practices to reduce inequality, we mean the transmission of inequality to children and how it affects their short and long-term outcomes. Other questions that I can answer quickly. Are we focused on primary or secondary data? Just as Kim said in answer to many other questions, we're interested in the best research projects. We don't privilege primary or secondary data. Is the focus on gender inequality? Gender is not one of the main focuses of our research portfolio in this area. However, we will listen based on a compelling case, especially gender in connection with race, ethnic, or income inequality might make a strong case. What about youth with disabilities? I would say the same thing. It's not disabilities per se that's the focus of our initiative, but disabilities that occur in concert with other forms of disadvantage would be very much on the table. Are we interested in multiple outcomes? Yes, and we would certainly be interested in programs, policies, or practices that affect not only the outcomes we've specified, but other types of outcomes. That would be fine. So someone asked earlier about health outcomes. Often we'll see mental and physical health, and even though it's the mental health rather than the physical health, that's the focus of our initiative, doesn't mean we wouldn't, we would dismiss it because there were health outcomes included. Someone asked about post-secondary education, and so I want to reiterate that our age span is age 5 to 25. The foundation has funded a number of studies of post-secondary education. We intend to continue doing so. Another question was about whether individual variables will be considered in the inequality agenda, and the answer is yes. Social settings may also be important. Settings are an important vehicle for reducing inequality, but rather than focusing on a vehicle or a mechanism or a site, we're focusing now on a problem. The problem is inequality, and we're not privileging one type of response over another, trying to understand.
So a related question, Adam, just came in about whether there's any preference for income versus racial ethnic inequality studies.
Yes, we do not have a preference among those. Both of those are among our particular interests.
Vivian, there was a question for you asking you to follow up that you had described the political, conceptual, and instrumental use in your variables, and someone was wondering if those are the only kind of uses or ways of thinking about use that we would fund, if they were limited in that way.
Yes, so that's a great question, and the answer is no. We're not limiting people's conceptual frameworks. In fact, we encourage people to bring theories and conceptual frameworks from other disciplines and other areas and migrate them to the study of research use. So, for example, we have communication scholars and political scientists who are examining the use of research in deliberation processes, policy deliberation. We have an anthropologist who's thinking about it more from a cultural exchange framework, what happens when researchers and practitioners come together, these two cultural groups. And so certainly we think this field of study is enriched if people bring different theoretical and conceptual approaches to this work.
And Adam, when you were talking, some folks were asking whether there was a preference for particular types of studies you would do, for example, intervention versus non-intervention. If it is intervention, whether you prioritize RCT, randomized controlled trials. Could you say something about that?
Yes. the foundation is not privileging one type of research over another. Our priority is that the research design should be aligned with the question. So if your question is about impact, then you really need to have a design that allows you to say something about impact. And randomized studies, of course, have advantages in saying something about impact. But we're interested in a broader range of questions than just impact. We're interested in building theory. We're interested in building the elements of programs that can reduce inequality. We're interested in interpreting the meaning of experiences to participants. We're interested in illuminating the mechanisms through which programs have their effects. So all of these are questions other than impact, which would call for designs other than randomized controls style, and we're interested in all of them. We have a statement in our application guide that we are more likely to fund thoughtful exploratory studies than we are narrow studies, even if they're more rigorously controlled. So again, if your research question is about impact, you need a design that allows you to say something about impact. But with that said, we're not privileging one type of research question over another.
Another question that's come up, previously the foundation has had an interest in measurement development, and I was wondering, both Vivian and Adam, if you could comment on that, how it relates to the two areas.
Yes, with respect to the Inequality Initiative, we are interested in measurement, and it seems likely that advances in measurement could help the study of inequality. So work on measurement that we're particularly likely to fund is going to be work that advances a research agenda broadly, not just for the researcher, but for others who might follow on with other studies of inequality based on the tools that have been provided in this measurement study.
Great. And Vivian?
So my response is quite similar to Adam's when it comes to the use of research. We're interested in building the field's capacity to do these studies and to learn from them. So if the measurement work is about a construct that's important for the field and others can use them in future studies, then we are interested in that.
Great.
Kim, one of our questions would like to know whether the foundation makes available previously funded letters of inquiry or proposals.
Up to date, we haven't, because one thing that tends to happen when we do that is people design a study that looks very much like the proposal that we share. That is a risk. So what we've tried to do in our research application guide is extract some of the qualities or characteristics of very competitive proposals, so then people can then apply that to their particular research question.
Another question that came very early on and we didn't have a chance to get to it was whether, if you look at who's been funded by the foundation, there's a lot of universities in there. Do we only fund universities, or are nonprofits eligible?
We fund a range of organizations, so not just universities, but they have to have the expertise and capacity to pursue the research questions that they're posing. So they just have to demonstrate that in a proposal. So I see another question that we're getting a lot is about the Officers Research Award that's come up a number of times. And we use the same criteria for judging an Officers Research Award as we would for a full proposal. And it has to, of course, fit with our interests. These are awards that are up to $25,000. And they are also submitted at the 3 different cycle points, January, May, and August, that letters of inquiry for the larger proposals.
Thank you. Vivian, there's a question about where to find the supplemental guidance for the use of research evidence initiative.
Great. That's a great question. And this is a great opportunity for me to encourage everyone to go to our website. And I would encourage you to go to 2 different places. The first is, if you go under our funding opportunities and go down to research grants, you'll click through there and you'll find application guidance for research grant applicants. Now that's a general set of application guidance that's useful no matter if you're applying for inequality or use of research evidence. If you go further into the website, under our funding opportunities for use of research, you will also find a separate download for the supplementary guidance. So that's one section of the website I encourage people to go to. The second section of the website I encourage people to go to is on the far right side of the home page is a tab called Resources. And under there, we also have a section on studying the use of research, and we've listed grantee publications and presentations, some of our own writing about our interests. And there's also some resources about studying social settings. So for people who are applying through or inequality interested with an interest in understanding how settings can be leveraged to address inequality, they may find some of those resources useful. And I would just encourage you to come back to that part of the website because soon you will find resources on inequality as well.
Here's a question I'm so eager to answer. I really like this question. It's a question about resilience. This is a question about whether we would be interested in supporting studies that seek to understand success despite exposure to inequality among young people. And the answer is absolutely. What better way to identify programs, policies, or practices that reduce inequality than by showing cases where young people who grow up in disadvantaged environments are nonetheless successful. In other words, resilience. So, of course, you would want to frame that as understanding conditions that reduce inequality as demonstrated through the resilience of these youth. But I would definitely hope that research along these lines would be part of our portfolio.
So Kim, perhaps you could answer this question. There's been quite a few about our age range, which is now 5 to 25. So what if some portion of the sample in the study is within that age range, but others aren't? That's part A, and I'll let you answer that first.
The primary focus of the study needs to be on within our age range, between 5 and 25. That's how I would define that. So if a proposal came in that spilled over and the focus was really on the group outside of our range group, that would not move forward. If their focus were on a younger age group and that those folks were part of the study, we would certainly consider it as long as the case was made for the focus being on our age range.
Okay. The other question, the part B of this question, is that what if people are doing a longitudinal study, a follow-up to an intervention, and the intervention was for youth within our age range, but now they are adults and they are out of the age range? Would we consider that?
I would say that we would not consider that because, again, it's left the point at which we're interested in programs, policies, and practices for our age range outside.
Kim, another question for you is on what the reporting requirements there are once a grant is successfully funded.
Once a grant is successfully funded, people provide a yearly update to us, which they have a post-award reviewer who takes the time. That's one of the senior staff members to take the time to read that and provide a response. And then at the final stage, when their award's ending, they also complete a final report. And these are focused more about the progress people are making, challenges that they're having, ways in which we can provide some assistance, as well as about what they're learning from the project.
And Vivian, I have a question for you. It's about whether we collaborate with other funders or whether researchers can win our awards to supplement work that they have through another agency. For example, suppose someone has a federal grant for a large study and would like to engage in work that's aligned with our interests as a supplement to that ongoing work. Is that something we'd be interested in?
Yes, it is. So we have often given awards that supplement larger federal grants. And the key there is making sure that the additional work you're proposing is compelling and fits the foundation's interest. So we don't want to duplicate funding or fund work that's already been funded. So there has to be a piece that's carved out for foundation support.
So one question that's come up again is whether people can have conversations with us prior to submitting the LOI. And I just want to reiterate that while we'd like to do that, our staff capacity does not allow us to do that. So what we recommend is that you engage with the website. There's a lot of materials that we collect and put up there, and then take your best shot at the letter of inquiry and submit it on one of the deadlines. So I think we just have a few more minutes for questions before we wrap up. If people want to send in a few more questions, we're willing to take those now.
Kim, would you talk a bit about our funding rates, our proposal invitation and funding rates?
Sure, I can mention that again. So about 15% of the letters of inquiry are invited to submit a full proposal. Of the full proposals we receive, about a quarter to 1/3 are recommended for funding. If you do the math, what you learn is that we fund about 5% of the letters of inquiry that we receive.
Kim, one questioner would like to know what the requirements are for laying out a budget, both in the letter of inquiry and in the full proposal.
Okay. So we have budget forms that are on our website to help people fill out the application. At the letter of inquiry stage, people do a very cursory budget, kind of broad strokes to give us an estimate of what they're requesting and how that will be spent. And then if you're invited for a full proposal, you provide a much more detailed, both a structured budget and the justification for that budget. And all of those forms are on the website.
What about someone who has 5 years of research that need to be undertaken? Could they submit a budget that would cover 5 years of work?
Yeah. So what I would suggest in that case is to submit your ideal case, knowing that we typically fund projects that are 2 to 3 years in length and typically do not award grants that exceed $600,000. But if you feel it's essential to follow a group for 5 years to answer your question, to put that together and present that in an LOI with a compelling argument, and then let us make a decision about what we do for the next step.
So there's a couple of questions here, Kim, about whether we would support the implementation of an intervention or the implementation of a program.
Right. This is a great question, and we actually receive a number of inquiries about supporting the implementation of the program. Our funding dollars go to the research, not to the implementation of the program. So that's where we suggest you put your focus.
Do you fund or do you entertain proposals to start research institutes or centers?
We have not done that in the past. Right now, I don't think we have a plan to do that. As I mentioned before, that the proposals we get are usually from about studies that are beyond the planning and pilot stages.
We're going to be taking all the questions that have come in. We have listed them and saved them, and we're going to be using them to develop a frequently asked questions document, which will also be on the website later this spring. So in that sense, all of you are helping to shape and clarify our research agenda, and we really appreciate your participation today, and we look forward to hearing from you in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.